Well, I hope it's worth you staying. I'm going to say a few things that I think you probably won't understand because we have different semantics in the UK for things. If it gets a bit difficult sometimes in terms of the semantics, just put your hand up and say, what does that mean before I go on, because I'm going to be using the same language quite a lot. And I have the same problem when I come here sometimes, I guess. So, who needs a doctor anymore? Clearly this audience believes that doctors are going to be redeployed. I think that's pretty debatable, but clearly you're all taking different practices in terms of your healthcare. So there's certainly going to be tremendous change going forward. And in the UK, I've been working for the NHS now for 3 years. My first year I saw hardly any change and I thought a lot of things were really dire in terms of lack of best practice. The second year, massive change and massive investment. This third year that I'm there, I must say, I think it is absolutely fantastic, and we're doing some major change things that are going on, major innovations that definitely are seeing a displacement of doctors, but it's not clearly 100%. So for those of you who don't know about the NHS, I thought I'd just put one slide up, very snapshot about the scale of what we do. We have 1.3 million employees in the UK. I think we're about the third largest employer in the world as far as I'm aware. People think the NHS is an organisation. Fundamentally, it doesn't exist. It's a brand. And for 60 years this organisation has existed according to most people. But if you look at it, it's actually 650 different organisations that are hung together because they get funded from central government. So a lot of you who may go there, and I've just had a chat with one of you here today, who are trying to find a central government place for procurement, that is a very, very rare situation where you would do that. It's still best to go and see traditional buyers, decision makers, influencers and so on. Clearly we have a government department called the Department of Health, which funds, but it's not the NHS. We're 1,000 hospitals. We have 1.5 million patient contacts a day. We only spend about $3.2 thousand per patient, so it's a lot less than what you spend here. But our total budget is about nearly $200 billion per year in spend, and that's 9.2% of GDP. So it's a pretty significant player. A lot of innovation is going on. So my talk has a lot of resemblance to the previous two talks, but in a different way. In relation to the first talk, yes, I'm covering almost the same topics, the same words are on my slides, and a few more, and I'm going to talk about some of the implementation of some of those schemes already that we've got. Also, the second talk was about process, and you'll see a lot about process and the fact that you do need it for those innovations improvements. And we're a real advocate of process. And I love the point about process has to come first. We spent 2 years developing what we believe is one of the best processes for innovations in the world. And I've now changed my organizational structure because it's just embedded in the mentality of the organization. I don't need that organization that I had 2 years ago because that just is inbred within my team. So if we look at this single slide, I think I've captured here probably 80 or 90% of the major issues facing healthcare in the UK today. I think there are similar problems, particularly with migratory populations in France, in Germany and so on. And I think on the west coast of the United States, in LA, you have issues with South America, in Miami and so on. And we can't forget that we have these changing demographics going on all the time. We have different disease conditions. In East London, we have 10,000 patients with TB. Who would have thought that 10 years ago, that we have to deal with that? In South London, we have, in one particular ethnic group, we have one of the highest suicide rates in the world. In East London, we have ethnic groups there where there are huge diabetes problems that are pushing up our healthcare costs immensely. So in each local health economy that we have different issues where we have to spend our budget differently, and we need different innovations just in local communities. So I'll talk about how we're dealing with that as a nation now and how we have to address the changes that's taking place. It's not static, it's changing every day at the moment. Not only that, we're faced with significant problems related to lifestyle diseases such as obesity, but also we now have a realization that in the teenage community, the use of drugs can trigger certain aspects of schizophrenia that are creating huge mental health bills for the UK economy at the moment. So it's not just the aging population, but also the younger people. And that is a huge cost to us. I was part of what we call the baby booming years, and where had this surge in the population in the 50s and early 60s. And we're all getting older now, and we're about to cause the UK health economy real problems. And we need to deal with that aging population. I think the first presentation, I think 50% of the kind of technologies we're looking at are to deal with that increased requirement in that area. We mustn't forget, people forget about, we've still got population growth issues. The population is growing, that's an increased health requirement, and also the diversity of the population we have is immense. And in London, I'm told, we have 365 different languages spoken today, probably the most languages any one city in the world. And that just gives you a reflection of the kind of diverse issues we have in terms of culture and genetics and disease issues to deal with. And we're discovering new conditions and cultural issues that we have to deal with on a health basis every day. We're faced with a lot of publicity, and I think in the United States you've only got this just in the last 3 to 6 months, but a lot of publicity about superbugs and MRSA. And in the UK it was believed for a long time by the British public, and still is, that MRSA comes out of the hospitals and it's the healthcare system fault. And it's nothing to do with the fact that the patient carries it into the hospital. So this had massive clean-up programs, but it's the next day when the patients come there, it's back to normal again. The patient carries it in. It's nothing to do with that. It's due to the fact that these people have immune systems that can't cope with those bugs. But the publicity that we've had has created huge problems, and government strategy now insists that we invest huge amounts of money in MRSA. And I know Becton Dickinson here and a few other companies are looking at pre-admission screening, particularly for intensive care, where they put these screens in. And there are other bugs, though. We have a screen now for ESBL, for instance. So we've been forced to do things to clean up our act, not necessarily because of scientific reasons. Also, we're faced with a much more knowledgeable community. Most people have computers in their homes. They're able to go on the web and do some searches and find out what's wrong with their condition. They have an expectation about the health care they're going to get, and they're much more educated about what their needs are and also what they believe they should be getting and what their rights are. And we have to deal with that population and address that in a much different way to what we even did with my parents 10 to 20 years ago. We see, and you'll see a couple of examples in my slides, continuous incorrect utilization of resources, not necessarily created by the healthcare system, but by the customers, by the patients. We have a lot of patients who just turn up at accident and emergency. We find that 50% of people that turn up at accident and emergency don't need to be there. In many cases, there's nothing hardly wrong with them, and they could have gone to the doctor next day or even the nurse at a local surgery and had some treatment or even treated them themselves. And we're closing down A&E units now, not because we're just trying to save costs, but because they're actually not needed. But of course, that's a big public issue as well. So we've got some sort of anti-service perceptions where actually we're doing things where we're deploying the money into better service situations. And of course, because of all the different things we're seeing there and more, healthcare costs are rising, and we need to make decisions where we can reduce certain activities to really supply the general population with the best health care we can. So this is what policy shifts we've seen over about the last 4-year period, and also I've put a little bit in there of what I'm aware of in terms of policy shift, which maybe isn't totally out in legislation or in government news at the moment. But clearly there is a need to move patients from expensive acute trust care into the community where we can deal with that through very, very skilled people, but not through the medical community necessarily. A lot of conditions today we can treat without the need for continuous contact with a fully qualified doctor, and technology is going to be so critical in being able to treat in the community. The major policy issue in the UK today, and I'm sure that our minister is going to suffer because of this, is the really determined nature of the last year's policy change to move care out of acute into primary care and what we're calling polyclinics. So we're actually putting clinics in the community that can do a lot more services than they did before, or we're actually having federated services in the community where there'll be a number of centres that actually cover the requirements of the local healthcare economy. And this person has no fans whatsoever in acute trusts or primary trusts because everybody thinks that he is stealing their revenues. And so we have a hugely competitive situation within primary care, secondary care, and also the division of primary care into commissioning and provision, where the commissioners are bidding for provision, which sounds totally insane. It's absolute chaos in terms of the competitive nature of our healthcare economy today.
I don't understand commissioning versus provision.
Okay, so the commissioners have the budget, and they're the people who can buy services. So, for instance, if you have a GP, he may, in a GP surgery, he may have a budget to spend, so he will commission another trust to provide a service to him, and then they'll get paid. And so that's how it works in the UK. And what's happening is the primary care people traditionally have also done some provision. And what the government has said, well, that's not a competitive situation, and people are not getting the best cost-effective service. So what we're going to do is split the commissioning part from the provision in primary care, and private enterprise is going to come in and bid for that. But also the government-funded commissioning side is setting up their own provision operation and bidding as well. So you even have people like Virgin, Richard Branson in Virgin, bidding for that kind of area now. So it's a really big time of change. It could be chaotic, in fact, but we see all sorts of changes like that at the moment. We need much more point-of-care treatment, point-of-care diagnostics. Of course, a lot of that is very expensive in terms of capital equipment, implementation, inventory, infrastructure to fill the inventory and so on. And I think it's going to happen, but it will take 5 to 10 years to really get those mechanisms in place. Those mechanisms in the UK are not there today. And I've even had discussions with ambulance services about, please, can we have a brain scanner in the ambulance to do early diagnosis of stroke, because we know that if we had it, we would save millions of lives. And of course, that's a great idea, but it doesn't exist today. But if it did, everybody would want to implement it, but we need probably 5 to 10 years to implement. And we've got a desire, and it's actually happening now, that in some areas, particularly in aging, vulnerable and disabled populations, we're now developing care pathways where we're beginning to get better integration between the primary care trusts, social services and local authorities. And there was a mention earlier about assisted living, I think. And you can't do assisted living unless you have those three integrated fully, except through the private sector. And what I'm going to talk about now, because we want to talk about IT, is the huge investment that has been committed by government in the UK to the ICT side. Now, just before I go into that, I want to point out some of the things I mentioned right before I got round to doing my talk. If we look at some of the little technologies that have been around for the last few years and the difference it's making in terms of practice, and that's why you people, I think, put your hands up, is if we look at what we call NHS Direct Online, in other words, a service by which you can look at your own diagnosis and some other healthcare factors and get information online. We had 14 million hits, I think, at the end of 2006, and that's growing at 55% per annum. So I'll come back to that in a moment. If we look at the number of people doing telephone calls to NHS Direct, it's totally flat now at 7 million. We've got these walk-in centres that are now going to grow in the form of polyclinics and federated services. With the few that we have at the moment, there's 3 million visits, and the current growth is 25%, but the growth is restricted by the number of them that we have. As soon as we start rolling that out, I think there'll be a lot more. But if we look at that over the last few years in terms of the time it was started in 1999 to 2006, we're looking at the moment about only 4% of the patient contacts we get are through those kinds of means. But with that growth rate that we're seeing in some of those areas, it's growing from 4 to 5% this year, 5 to 6% next year, and so on. So I wonder what point that's going to saturate. And I don't have the data on that, but it's an intriguing point to see, are we actually going to have replacement diagnosis going on here? And if you also add to that the fact that pharmacies are giving more authority to actually offer services within the pharmacy setting, where somebody goes to their computer, they get a diagnosis, and they can go and get an OTC. That whole OTC area is beginning a little bit to open up, and it has to open up more going forward to help the health economy, because that is a real way of saving money. Hopefully they've got the diagnosis correct. You may notice there 51% of the contacts we get is still with primary care. So they're going to their GPs and then they're getting referred. So a phenomenal number of people are going through the primary care trusts every year. So on to the national program for IT. This was initiated in 2004. Who would want to do it? I mean, what a program. The legacy of 650 organizations, probably something like 10,000 different facilities with probably 30 to 50,000, I don't know, probably IBM can tell me how many, probably 30, 50,000 different legacy systems. How to integrate those? Well, it wasn't an integration program in many respects, but it was a way of putting a spine in place by which we could actually start to communicate down. And although there have been major issues with that, I must say they're doing very well now. And in the time frame involved and with the scale of the project, I think that's beginning to show some results. And the scale of the thing in terms of objectives at the beginning was to connect 100,000 doctors, 380,000 nurses, and 50,000 other healthcare professionals. And I was at Kaiser Permanente today, and they told me about their system, which sounds fantastic. I haven't seen it yet. But I think from what I heard, it proves that those kind of things can be done, and they have been done in the United States to a certain extent already. In addition to this huge budget of $15 billion on IT, the government instructed the National Health Service trusts to also spend 4% of their budgets per annum on improving their healthcare systems. And I must say, I don't know whether it's 4%, but I work with those trusts every day, and the output in terms of new software development and processes and systems is excellent. However, it's very fragmented and uncoordinated, and what we're doing, and I'll show you this in a moment, we're trying to coordinate best practice and disseminate that now on an applications base based on needs of patients and based on needs of the clinics and hospitals. Of course, you need to have data compatibility in terms of building those databases and so on, and I think there are still some issues around that, but we're not doing too bad, because after 2 years of this being in place, I actually started seeing people using the data for their own commercial gain, so it must have been pretty compatible. What was a big problem is, and I'm a real believer that you can't implement these things unless you do it locally, was at the beginning everything was nationalized, and they were trying to do it from a central point. And of course these are all local people with local needs, with local legacies. And the major step forward last year was that there was a decision to localize what was called Connecting for Health. And we've found that since then, and from working with those people, that we now do have the possibility of getting greater functionality in healthcare through local systems implementation. So if we look at the expected outcomes from the national program, they wanted a national broadband IT network called N3, National Care Record Service, electronic appointment booking, electronic prescription service, picture archiving and communications. And that was the objectives in 2004. And I have seen those all implemented very, very well in some places, but I also hear in some primary care trusts that it's a total nightmare. So you've got this situation where it's all about whether the management and the processes are in place to actually implement, and it's very, very people dependent. It's not about systems or management consultants or the hardware or the software. It's about the people in a lot of cases. And clearly there is a way to go until it's perfected, and we have issues right across London at the moment in terms of implementation, but we also see excellence in terms of some of the outcomes. Now, if I go back at some of the points since I've been around that I think are really important lessons here, and things that have been positive and negative. If you look back in 2006, when I first was looking at this, I just saw big suppliers coming in and trying to fit their square pegs in round holes. It was a whole thing of, we've got these great tools, we can solve the NHS has got to change, and you're no good, and we're great. Well, that's not the case. The NHS is very excellent at what it does in terms of healthcare, and it has a very, very fragmented use of different kinds of clinical practices, and the IT and technology has to help put that into practice. And that was what was missing. And I think there's been a lot of disasters that happened during 2004, 2005, 2006, and a little bit today because of that. Now, what's happening is they're beginning to learn that they have to turn the technology to meet the user requirements, and I think that's a major aspect of change that needs to take place in terms of big scale IT implementation where there's a lot of legacy in existence. Back in 2006, what I saw, although people said, oh well, it's not working very well, I saw massive data sets being pulled out of primary care in London where I could see maps of epidemiological data on different disease conditions that could help me select groups across London for different kinds of treatment. It could dictate policy. It could help pharmaceutical companies do clinical trial recruitment, etc. So it does mean that we're actually getting data sets that are used both in terms of the therapies that they're on and the outcomes of those, but also in terms of their history. I mentioned the Connecting for Health localization, which is very important. And then what we've been doing, and we're only just beginning to see the benefits of this, is where we're seeing best practice in software development on an applications basis, we're grabbing that and trying to get it out to the other trusts as quickly as possible. So that creates some form of standardization. And we're actually seeing real benefit now. And the savings are very good, and the results are very good from that. In terms of the objectives at the beginning, there was an objective for 2008, 2010 for remote telemonitoring. Now, I don't know whether I'm missing it, but today I must say I haven't really seen much of that. And maybe it's just hidden from me, but it doesn't seem to be happening yet. And maybe we're just trying to resolve the core problems first of all before getting there. But if we don't get the ability to do or have the infrastructure for the remote telemonitoring in the local areas in general, then clearly we can't do all the kind of things we need to do in terms of the aging population, palliative care, ambulatory care, and so on. And I imagine that what's happening is they're trying to get the rest in order first. So, from our perspective in London, we're really trying to focus now on what the local needs are to drive the ICT capability within the city. And that uses a lot of just trust-specific software, but also integrated approaches across London as well. We're trying to really drive it from the point of view of what is the clinic-specific application software we need, and we don't have to really look very far for that because the clinics know what they need, and they're often developing it either internally or through third-party vendors. There has been this lack of major IT vendor understanding of changing in healthcare requirements. It's not surprising because unless you're in there every day and you're getting your hands dirty, it's very, very difficult to understand healthcare systems, and the fact that every hospital you go to is different, and the fact that every clinic is different. There are no standard processes within a lot of these systems. It's good technology available quite often. We saw those disruptive technologies at the beginning today. We have a lot of those kind of things that if you knew you implemented them, we have good health economics on it, there'd be tremendous benefits. But every day I am surprised by how many things I see that pop up in front of me that I'm not aware of that may have been around for 2 or 3 years. And I have a team of people who search for things all the time. I don't think a lot of the small technology companies, or even sometimes the big players, are very good at conveying to the healthcare community the products that they have and the technologies that they have. And also remember, and you know, clinical directors, clinical practitioners are so busy they don't get the chance to go and look for products or look for the web. There needs to be better awareness within the clinical community of what's out there and available to them. And we had an unmet clinical needs session at our conference earlier this year where we had industry and clinical directors in the same room together. And they loved it. And usually people go home at around 5 o'clock in the NHS because they've got to get up early in the next morning. And they stayed for a drink session till 7 o'clock in the evening, which I'd never known before, where 100 people from industry and the NHS in London talked about unmet clinical needs and how to get closer links together and talk about, well, the button's wrong on this instrument, therefore we make mistakes, or little things like that, or I need this new product, or I need that better, or I need to... But the fundamental thing we realized from the session, which is unbelievable, is a lot of things they asked for, it was already available. And they couldn't implement it because they didn't know it was there. So our trusts are now developing or sourcing applications, and we're disseminating that. And actually that may go international next year. So that's a little bit about the general setting we're in and the issues and the problems and the successes we've had. I'm going to talk a little bit now about my own organisation and what we do. So before I go on to some of the outcomes, you understand our role in terms of the contribution we're making. Now, we've only been around as an organisation for 2.5 years. We're not a technology transfer organisation or anything like that. We're really a technology management organisation that does healthcare product development and medical product development. We have funds that take early stage concepts, just ideas, through those early product stages of development. We outsource that globally to best of breed developers. It's not a large sum of money, but it's enough to do what we need to do. And I'll show you some data on that in a moment. We cover 71 out of the 74 NHS trusts, so about 100 hospitals in London at the moment. We'll probably cover about 72 to 73 by the end of this year. So it means that we've got 170,000 staff in London alone to service, covering probably 70% of the innovation and research in the UK. And we're fed by a research budget from government on the clinical end of about $2.5 billion per year. So it's not a small sum of money. But this operation of 23 people at the moment, growing to 30 this year, operates off a budget of about $4 to $5 million. So, and that's plenty. We don't need more than that. We're out there to build innovation awareness. You know, remember, clinicians are busy saving people's lives. They often don't know they've been innovative. And we go out there and try to get them to recognize that if they do something to fit a patient requirement that's different to the standard, they could have made a significant improvement that's important to other people. And we tell them how to deal with that and how to manage it and not to get in touch with the press, and that they will be able to publish later, but we need to file a patent first or whatever. And we've trained in 2.5 years over 5,000 clinic-related staff in London about recognition of innovation and how to manage that. And that's caused a mushroom effect in the city in terms of innovation, not only the creation of innovation, but also innovation acceptance. So we find this intellectual property, we evaluate it in great detail. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. We protect it. I have a patent attorney internally, and I have a team of intellectually property savvy people. And more importantly, in the light numbers, if we didn't have money to fund the technology development, that would all be a waste of time. And that's a critical part, and we have good proof of concept funds for that. And then I have a commercial team and so on. The important thing about my team, and this may be a little bit different to what you would expect, is I have nobody in my team who works for the NHS. We're an organisation that's built of people out of Hewlett-Packards and IBMs and AstraZeneca's, GlaxoSmithKline's, Boston Scientific, Eli Lilly, and we're all commercial beasts. And that's important. If we don't have those commercial drivers to implement these things, they will never happen. And a lot of our evaluation, we think, in terms of the way we should drive innovation into the NHS, is based on if there isn't a commercial aspect to that product, it will never make it to market. And I think Molly's presentation earlier was talking about that there has to be a money aspect to most of these things. But we do disseminate some service innovations. But why would we do that? We only do it if there's a real health economic benefit. And we have some products which we don't make any money out of, but the savings to the NHS, particularly on software, is very high. Now, in our first year, we looked at 210 innovations coming out of the hospitals for evaluation. We looked at 279 this year. This year, it's grown to nearly 500, we believe, by the end of the fiscal year, because we've had 100% growth in the last quarter. And it's just mushrooming, and all sorts of golden nuggets are coming in that could have significant healthcare benefits, not just in the UK, but globally. And out of that, we can see we funnel down very, very quickly to about 60 projects for detailed analysis per year. We put about 30 products into product development, and we licensed last year 19 of these products. So that's our output kind of situation. Although we're at about 400 or 500 projects coming in this year, we have systems and processes that allow us to maintain a portfolio of about 120 projects all the time. It's really optimized to do that. And those projects are moving through the process to development and to market all of the time. If they stop, we kill the project. And a lot of the projects we review everything that comes in, we review first phase, 7 days, and 30 to 40% of the innovations get killed within 7 days, which a lot of academic people wouldn't like, but we're there to get the best things and the most valuable things to market as quickly as possible. And you'll see in there that 30% of what we do at the moment in terms of our active projects are in ICT, and a huge proportion is in medical devices. And of course, what's wonderful is if you can get a medical device that's linked into the ICT through a nice interface. We use a stage gate process, but the critical thing in the way we work in terms of identification, feasibility, validation, development, business development, is we fast track things, we leapfrog things, but each stage is linked to a specialist team. We don't have cradle-to-grave people who do find the technology, evaluate it, protect it, sell it. We don't believe that anybody has all these skill sets. So we have specialists for each part of that. We have people who go out there and do internal sales. We have people who evaluate it. We have professional project management from IBMs and from pharmaceutical companies, from the banking industry for digital media. We have business analysts. We have health economics people. And we have a business team. And without this corporate kind of commercial setting, we don't believe we're picking the right innovations to improve healthcare. And we do, everything that we do is recorded on a very good relational database, so we can cut that in any direction we want. And we tweak the process all the time by the data we get every month. And I'm on to watching that data and seeing what's happening within it. And we have, I think, established a very good thing. Now, as I said, we have a 7 days target to turn around everything that comes in. We get 5 to 10 new innovations per week. And basically, we review every Monday about 30 projects that at some stage either they're in development or they're in detailed primary data analysis in terms of market research or whatever. But you can see from this data, and we look at it from territory point of view because that's related to people, we look at their performance. And a lot of the time, we're actually hitting under 7 days, we're hitting 5 days. Sometimes we're above. It's usually when people go on holiday and they don't have that cover that we need. So that's a simple sort of issue to solve, because we then have started now migrating those projects to other people. But we're doing that, remember, with 500 innovations a year. So it's pretty good performance. We look at the time it takes us to do more detailed analysis. We look at the time it takes us to develop the products. And you can see here that if you look at the yellow line, we had problems, we felt, on how long it was taking us to do that detailed level of analysis in terms of freedom to operate, market research, primary data, focus groups, and so on. And we're now in a situation we can probably, on those 60 projects, really make a commitment on investment to develop those products now within something like 3 to 4 months, which compared to industry is not bad. And in development terms, we are getting products out on the market very quickly. So we have products, I'm not going to show those today because that's a different subject area, which we have developed from concept to actually having a prototype ready to go out and license within 3 months. So we've switched on an external resource that we know that's a specialist resource and developed a very excellent medical device for licensing in 3 months. We've done very sophisticated medical devices through to animal studies in 9 months from concept. And my guys, my engineers, will go into an operating room where a surgeon has a problem, where he says, look, this is the problem, I have a concept for a solution, I'm not an engineer, can you show me how to do it? And my engineers will design something while they're in the operating room, come out, do the full design, then work with a product development company to develop that and file the patents. And we do that really in a very, very fast manner. We suddenly started getting curves when we were analyzing our data about our process that were static. They looked static. The shape had been changing for 18 months, and then they became static. And I thought, oh my goodness, my team are just going having coffee breaks down at Starbucks. and leaving home, leaving work early to go down the pub. They're not working anymore. But what we found is we'd reached an equilibrium position with the process where we could hit that process with 1,000 projects a year and it wouldn't bend. It would still have the same thing. And what happened was we actually started looking at migration of projects across gates every month, and the yellow lines are just showing that every month these projects are moving gates. And you need to do that to ensure your organization is optimized. So in our second year of existence, we put 30 products into product development. We put 4 into clinical trials, they're mainly diagnostic screens, 5 patents, 22 products into business development, 19 licenses. But what I've shown here is in our first year look focusing on software, we put 9 products on the market. And that's not bad going. And that means that out of 9 products, any trust in the United Kingdom could actually adopt those. Now, if you look at our active products in development, there's a huge part that is medical devices, which will hit the market next year. If you look at business development, we have a very big portfolio of software that will hit the market this year. So the software we can migrate very, very quickly because there's a time window, as you know, where if you didn't hit the market when that software is needed, somebody else will do it. And so we've really accelerated those programs. And we have 5 products which we're launching, 1 a month at the moment. And we just launched an EHR project last month, which is for human resources in healthcare. It runs at $100,000 per pop. And we have 40 sales leads already. Why? Because the savings for those trusts is $1 million per year. So we don't just look at commercial value and revenues. We look at health outcomes. Now, about 2 years ago when I started this, I was getting companies that approached me and said, David, we're not close enough to the NHS to really understand the market data for this. Can you give us some data and so on? And they were telling me what they wanted. And I'm from a marketing background, so I was saying, well, that's not really market research data that they require, but what is it? Then after a while, I didn't know anything about health economics, but then I realized that what they're really after was health outcomes data for things that didn't exist yet. And so then I thought, well, how do you do that? And I thought, well, I know what I want to do. Now I've got to find a way of doing it. So I went out to the top UK centres and I tried to recruit people from York and London School of Economics. And I realised that these people were so blinkered, they couldn't even see that you could do health economics at that stage in a modelling sense. And so then I went outside the UK and I've actually hired myself a damn good German who actually has worked for a lot of different pharma companies and medical device companies. He saw what I was trying to do. And he's now got a team of 3 people who are doing preclinical health outcomes analysis on products that don't exist. And that has made a significant difference to our programs in terms of what we invest in, what we don't invest in, and what industry will invest in, and what today, from discussions over here, venture capitalists will invest in. Because if I can show health economics data, it means that when they get to going to NICE, or when you get going to the FDA, you've basically started a process by which you know that you're on a good path before you even get there. And we've done that for about 20 projects so far. Now this is where it gets really good. When we did those projects in the early days on medical devices where a surgeon was saying, I have a need, and we developed the product, we realized that those were the billion-dollar products. So we have a couple of billion-dollar products now going into animals, and these are the ones I'm raising VC money for at the moment. And we realize as well, a lot of the time we sit there and we just receive passively a lot of technology which is rubbish. It doesn't have any need, there's Me Too, there's all sorts of problems with it. And we have to spend 80% of our time dealing with projects which we know are not going to reach market. And that doesn't make any sense for any efficient operation. And we want to at least get to a 50-50 situation, which everybody tells me is impossible. But that's what we're trying to do. So we've now turned it round a bit. We've said, well, if the best projects are coming from a surgeon or a director of nursing or whoever recognizing an unmet clinical need, why don't we turn the organization in that way? So what we did is we said, okay, we'll experiment. So we went out to the whole of London and said, are there any senior clinicians that want to form clinical advisory panels with us to look at unmet clinical need? And we had 82 senior clinicians who came back to us in 16 different clinical areas. And we ran our first unmet clinical need panel with 3 top cardiologists in London who are competitive. Usually they don't talk to each other, they compete for funding, they have big egos, but they all got together around a table on a Friday afternoon for 2 hours. And from that first session, although they were really skeptical, they actually came up very easily with 8 unmet clinical needs, where actually in that particular field we believe we can develop technology that actually can address those needs. But it was driven off them as a group, the need. Now we need to validate that, we're going through a process of validation, and then we will partner with industry and collaborate with industry to develop those products, which are already, in a way, although it's 3 people, the top 3 people in London, that is market validation of the need for those, and it's actually patient validation, because there's 3,000, on one of them there's 3,000 people sitting on the operation table every year who are dying without that product. We've got to find a way of dealing with the volume now, though, because we've still got our 400 or 500 passive projects coming at us, but what we really want to focus on is maybe 100 unmet clinical needs and develop products over the next 5 to 10 years that address those unmet clinical needs. Of course, industry wants to pay big money to access these groups, and that's a different matter for all sorts of things. Now, I'm now going to go on to some of the things we've been working on. I'm not going to go into great detail like the other speakers did because I've got too many of them, but I just want to give you an overview of the impact today, not things that will be implemented in the future, but things that are being implemented in trusts in London today using new technologies that exist. They're not, high technology, and I think they're things that exist that can make a big difference in cost saving, patient care, and so on. So some of these have been shown in the previous slides today. So if we look at patient pathways and patient tracking, by tracking patients and analyzing that, and there are some models, and there was some demonstrated earlier, I think there are algorithms around, and new algorithms being generated all the time, by which you can get real productivity gains by the way you manage your patient flow. And there's a lot of those in development in London today and being implemented real time. We also have under development, and there are projects with British Telecom and others across the city, where we're really looking for what is commonly defined in the UK, I don't know whether you use the same terminology here, as dashboards, where there is information available on screen within clinics where a doctor can see at any one point what is going on and to get the overview. And the doctors and the directors of nursing or whoever is running the show can adjust the resource base and things to meet demand. And of course you get increases in efficiency, but also you get increases in quality of patient care. And one of the things that's really interesting and that came up today in terms of readmissions, and I'll show you some data in a moment, is clearly if you don't treat the patient at the right time, you have a lesser and lesser chance of making the right treatment and having them come back again. And we have data that shows that if you treat them quickly, you get a 50% reduction in readmissions. So, those kind of things are very, very useful in terms of improving the quality of care. We're actually working right now on a real-time hygiene monitoring and control system for hospitals in London as well, using wireless technologies and using devices which we're developing. We're working on real-time prescription advice to GPs, where that advice is saving hundreds of thousands of pounds, where they can type into the screen, I'll come to that in a moment, but save massive amount of money. Web-based HR systems, saving $1 million per trust a year. Evidence-based commissioning tools. This is an area where we're really working hard now, and I heard today that Kaiser Permanente are now coming over to sit with the NHS to work on a sort of international basis on really doing world-class commissioning systems. We have systems we're now putting in place that sound strange, but a lot of the handover systems that have existed in hospitals in the past, for when you change shifts or you change to a weekend shift, people have to have a meeting, they transfer notes, they're on paper and so on, but we're actually working on databases and software which will make that all automated, which means there'll be less mistakes, there should be increased quality of care, there should be increases in productivity. And very important, I only realised when I was talking to some clinicians the other day, the problems they have in terms of their inefficiency as individuals, as surgeons, is standing there with a problem and they can't get a specialist. They can't find a specialist in the hospital to come and help, and sometimes the patients die. Pretty frustrating stuff. But also they spend 20 to 30% of their time sometimes looking for a resource, whether it be an individual consultant or whether it is a piece of equipment. Of course, you can tag, and it's old technology now, that you tag RFIDs onto equipment so you can find the equipment. But there are locator systems now for consultants out there, and I'll show you one of those in a moment. So they're all productivity gains, quality gains, efficiencies, and so on. If we now look at this one, on care in the community, what are the things we're working on there? Well, for instance, we already have for the STI clinics the ability to do SMS texting for appointments. And per STI clinic, we're saving probably about $100,000 per clinic per year in the whole thing of sending out letters, the problems of the STI patients not liking to do certain things, and the ability online to optimize their treatment based on symptoms. And that has been a real innovation, but it's very, very simple. There's nothing rocket science about it. As I said, in London we have a terrible problem with alcohol abuse and drug abuse with all sorts of impact, particularly in young people. We've now got systems where we're doing text messaging services to remind people not to do certain things and to do certain things to help them in tackling their drug abuse and alcohol abuse situation. And fundamentally, we believe that's going to save a tremendous number of lives and also costs in terms of healthcare at every aspect of their life following on. There's a lot of people I've been meeting over here this week who are working on a whole range of learning models and computer-aided brief interventions types of things, computer-aided therapies for depression, for Alzheimer's, for learning disabilities and so on. We have a whole spectrum of these things going on now. The question is, how do you distribute those to the community? And some of the models that you use here in the United States we're trying to learn from, but I'm afraid the same distribution channels don't exist in the UK. So we have great products, but we don't have the distribution channels you have here. And in fact, what may be sad is that we have products in the UK that we may distribute into the United States through your channels before we actually get them into the UK. And that's just because of the nature of the system we have. We're working on assisted living, and I'll tell you about a centre that we've just got $5 million to set up. And we're working on automated inventory monitoring in the home. So if you have haemophiliac patients, they won't have to worry about their supply. There'll be an automated system by which and that is a project that has been worked on with O2. In terms of point of care, I don't need to go into details here. You've already seen some of them, but there's probably now, I don't know, 50 to 100 different point of care diagnostics you can get out there. There's a lot of remote monitoring and diagnostics tools coming through. Still isn't the infrastructure in place to make them happen. And also, we've got an ambulance system that's looking at remote transmission of ECG, and we've got some data on that in terms of tremendous benefits in heart attack patients. Improved treatment, alternative treatments to drug therapies. You know, in mental health, we have huge, huge growth in that problem area. The drugs don't work. And what CBT has been a major innovation in this, where you don't have to go to drugs anymore, just using CBT, and then different methods of delivery in terms of home care, where you remove the patient from a lot of the low security mental health institutions and you can get them into the home environment by using the right treatments would be good. Patient assessment tools. A lot of times we misdiagnose, and there's still the real need for very good IT tools and software to diagnose. And then you may have heard of Map of Medicine. It's a very good knowledge base which the doctors have access to look at different pathways for different disease conditions. Okay, so this is the one I just mentioned. This is a hospital in London. They basically have about 600 heart attack patients coming in a year in emergency. It's basically a situation where a patient would have the symptoms of a heart attack and phone 999 in England, 911 here, I think. No, 911, I can't remember. 911, is it? Yes. Yeah, 911. Or they walk into a doctor's office maybe with problems sometimes, but usually it's an ambulance situation. What we've got in place now is we've put the ECG into the ambulances. That's transmitted to the trust. The paramedics will also recognise whether and activate the pathway for the trust. And by the time the ambulance gets to the hospital, the trust cardiac team is already activated to perform the angiography on arrival. Now, you may have that already here, but in London, that's a major improvement. They do non-invasive technique, basically, and they basically, on arrival, within 20 minutes, arteries are reopened. They do door-to-balloon time of 90 minutes. And what we've seen now, that in terms of the clinical outcomes on that, there's a 45% have a stay in hospital now of less than 48 hours compared to a national average of 6 days, and we've halved the mortality rate in 1 year. There's nothing high technology about this. This is just taking technologies that exist and putting the infrastructure and processes and management in place to make it happen. The cost base of that improvement is not very high, but the level of improvement in terms of health outcomes is massive. And the reduction in the risk of a second heart attack, which is the point I was mentioning earlier, because we've done a timely intervention, the chance of a second heart attack has been reduced substantially. What's important here is, of course, we've involved 2 or 3 different organisations in the process. We've involved a separate ambulance service. We've got some infrastructure issues there in terms of the communications. So you have to have all that in place to work, and that needs some really good project management to make it happen. But that's one of the top outcomes we've had in London this year, I think. This is another one. I've taken a completely different angle now. This is about prescribing drugs. What we've realised is a lot of time in terms of GP practices, they just prescribe their favourite drug or one they're used to or the one that's top of the list or whatever. They don't often look at the price and don't always look at the optimum treatment. Well, now there are nice pieces of software together with nice updated databases online that are updated every day with the latest drug prices, the latest drug regimes and so on. So when a GP, if he's got time, can just tap into the system, he will get the best advice on the drug to prescribe. And on this particular pilot run in 93 GP practices, in that first year there were 127 recommendations that they took off the system. That's 11.8% though of the total number of prescriptions, so that not many people did it. And only 38% of those recommendations were adopted, but still it saved $1.5 million per year in that primary care trust. Now if you then multiply that up, if they'd adopted it fully, that would be $5 million saving per year. If you then multiply that from the 300 or 400 primary care trusts we have across the UK, you're into billions of dollars of saving just through the use of a simple web-based system on pricing on drugs. So we launched these 9 products onto the market last year, including what we call EHR. If we look at this one, this is on human resources in a trust. We have hospitals that basically have between 5,000 and 15,000 people in per trust. And huge issue in terms of people motivation, human resources issues, and usually the human resource departments are just overwhelmed and they can't provide the proper service. So your whole efficiency in terms of a hospital goes down. And also there's a disconnect between clinical managers and their team. This was recognised by a very smart HR director in one of our trusts, who then decided that she felt and wanted to test that if they moved a lot of the HR questions onto a web-based intranet system, whether the staff or the managers would become connected again and then resolve those problems more easily. Also, she felt that she didn't need all her HR team. They weren't performing the function she wanted them to do. So we funded the development of the software. In the first year of its existence in that trust, she estimates that they've saved $1 million just on HR costs. But not only that, the impact has been the connectivity between the staff and the management and the motivational levels of the staff, because they're being dealt with properly rather than by a remote team in HR, but by the managers themselves. And it's really fast and effective and easy to use. We've now put this out onto a SharePoint platform to sell to trusts across the UK. In the first month, without hardly any marketing, we have 40 sales leads for that. So there's a revenue driver here, but just think about that. Every trust needs something like this. Every hospital needs something like it. If they'd all developed their own system, that would have been 40 times that cost base. But hopefully we're going to improve the service levels of those hospitals through one piece of very simple software with fantastic content. This is in monitoring. Have I got much? 5 minutes or?
Actually about 2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay. I'll be very quick. Telemedicine. This is monitoring of childhood epilepsy, where if you lock a child in a hospital, wired up for 2 weeks, you'll probably get the wrong diagnosis, and then the treatment will be pretty disastrous. This is where we use wireless technology. The child's got a monitor on in the school he goes to, and there's video evidence as well being collected. And remotely through a web browser, basically we've got technology here where the clinician can analyze the data at any time to diagnose the child's condition. This is onto assisted living platform and assistive technology. There is no core centre in the UK to do this. I recognised that 2 years ago. We just raised $5 million to set up a centre to design and develop assistive technology for the ageing, disabled and vulnerable populations. And that was launched in the House of Commons in March. And we're actually just about to open the centre in East London for the UK in November this year. So I think it's important to collaborate with technology vendors to provide the right solutions. Just a couple of examples from a couple of companies we're working with at the moment. This is Cisco. They've developed this health presence, which is a pod, and I've actually used this, where you sit down, you've got potential diagnostics there that you can use, where you get instructions to use them remotely. And there's somebody sitting that seems on the other side of the table to you, but in fact it's a doctor sitting somewhere remotely anywhere in the world. And it actually it's quite usable, actually. And of course, this has real implications in terms of efficiencies for primary care going forward. And we're actually got that running now, not in London as a pilot, but this I think is the first pilot in the world anywhere where Cisco are running a pilot in Aberdeen in the UK. And they've already run quite a successful trial on 100 patients. But that's the kind of thing that I think we're going to see innovating primary care in the future. And this will not just be in the hospitals. They're thinking of putting this in railway stations, in Boots, the chemists, which is a bit like your Waldegraves, is it, or something? Waldegraves. And then we have also the Cisco locator, which is the thing I told you about, where we're actually now able to locate across a hospital where, for instance, there's a neurosurgeon or a particular specialist nurse, where they are, how close they are, and it will contact them to come to a particular location, and the same with the equipment. We're also doing some work with Humana. We just started that, so I don't really know too much about that at the moment in detail, but basically we're working on some patient tracking systems, which I mentioned earlier, that has some really nice outputs. And also they have this thing, a device which they're looking at wellness areas. So this particular trial they're doing here, which was in the United States, not in the UK, is one which is on the sort of prompting of people to do things to prevent obesity. But you could use the same prompting system and monitor the outcomes for all sorts of disease conditions, and they mention their improvement levels here. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you got a flavour for all the breadth of things we're doing, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
We have time, we have time for a couple of questions. Any questions for Dr. Chilvers in the front? Please wait for the microphone to come to you in the front here.
Well, thank you very much. I was really impressed with the number of innovations and on spot development, but I couldn't help not thinking about that. How are you handling the post positioning of the product in the market and ongoing QA and quality control and revisions of the systems?
Yeah, sure. So we have a policy internally where we look for our quickest endpoint for being involved in the project. So we're not going to be a sales and marketing operation. We're not tending to do CE marking ourselves. We're looking for a partner. So we identify an endpoint right at the beginning of the process where we want to get out of the project. And that endpoint is really the first point that we think we've de-risked the product enough for a company to license it or a venture capitalist to fund a startup company. And then that other partner will do all of the things you talked about. So we're not in the business of doing that final phase, apart from on software at the moment, which we'll do the same thing on soon. But the software is the only area where we actually do any form of sort of maintenance ourselves. Does that answer your question?
One more.
I've got feedback here.
Yeah.
Do you have an appeal process for those ideas that get rejected up front? Process?
It's interesting because we don't really get an appeal. What happens is we generate a large data file on all the reasons why we've rejected a project. And most of the people we deal with are very, very intelligent. And I think in the 1,000 projects we've looked at so far, we've probably had about 3 people who've come back very irrationally and complained about it. Now, there are those people, and you know them, but you've got to have good backup data, and we record everything on that. So we give that back to the inventor for free. Now, we also have a position where we say, okay, if we don't want to take it forward, and the trust hospital doesn't want to do anything with it, we actually offer it for free back to the inventor, and we assign the technology to the inventor. So if he really believes there's value in it, he can mortgage his house, and people do, and invest in useless technology. And we do see that happening. We do see that happening. But that's up to them. So we're actually very, very good at sort of feeding that back in.
What's the motivation for somebody bringing their idea to your organization as opposed to a VC?
We're really good at what we do. And we have a track record now. I mean, we have references, such in cardiology, when the top cardiologists in London, is recommending to his buddies and everybody to come and see us because we delivered product for him. And of course, we do a process which a VC doesn't. A VC only looks at investing in a company. We're actually doing the risk phase of product development, pre-equity. So this is a pre-equity phase that we do. We also have a seed fund, which I didn't mention today. We've got a seed fund which we're launching in December, which is about a $12 million seed fund, funding up to about $500,000 per shot. So that fills another funding gap. So we have a feasibility fund, we have a proof of concept fund, and we will have a seed fund. And when I was at the VCs in Palo Alto today, they were just going, this is just fantastic because you're de-risking our investment, and you're coming to us with a product which is not just a prototype, but you're doing the first animal studies, you're doing survival studies, and so they're at a stage where the value for them is higher and the risk is lower.
All right. So known working microphone. All right, so we are now at the end of our show for today. We'll start here tomorrow at 8 o'clock for breakfast, 9 o'clock for the conference. And I'd like to personally thank Dr. Chilvers for being such a good sport about the AV. So please, let's thank him for... Now we're at the fun part of the event. There's a fine reception outside.